Before I get started, one thing I wanted to note is that Blender has been updated from 2.8 to 2.9. Now I checked and it looks like most of the major updates are geared towards kind of the VFX, particle effects side of things, so not something that will affect the modeling mesh side, which is more so what we care about in the paleontology realm. However, if you're interested in what these updates were, I will link in the upper right of this video to Blender's video about these changes. One other thing is, as I'm doing these tutorials, a reminder that I use the Industry Compatible Keymap, which you can set your Blender to by going to Edit, Preferences, and then Keymap. And then you just select Industry Compatible up here. This is more in line of the controls of things like Maya, Autodesk kind of software. But if you go to other Blender tutorials, I think you'll find for the most part that they use the Blender Keymap, so it's good to be aware of the differences. Okay, to start with navigating the viewport in Blender, you're going to want a 3-button mouse, so a mouse with a scroll wheel. And first thing is, if you want to rotate, you're going to hold down Alt, and you're going to hold down the left mouse button and just rotate around. Next, if you want to pan, you hold down Alt, hold down the middle mouse button or the scroll wheel, and then just move the mouse around. And then finally, you can zoom in and out either just by using the scroll wheel or by holding down Alt and then holding down the right mouse button. Okay, so once you've got those down, the next tools that you'll want to be able to use are to actually transform whatever object you're working on. In this case, I'll just demonstrate with the default cube. So first, in order to move your object, you can select the Move tool, which also has the shortcut W. And if you're ever wondering what the shortcut for something is, if you just hover over an option, it will tell you. And then you can either pull these arrows to pull it along an axis, or even move it in a plane by selecting one of these plane little toggles. Okay, rotate is this button down here. Similar sort of thing. The shortcut is E, and then you can just hold one of these dongles and rotate it like that. And finally, we have scale, which you won't want to use so much if you're working on scans because you want to preserve the scale of the original scan. But it's the similar kind of thing where you can pull these little tools to stretch and shrink your object in different dimensions. Okay, so I'm going to delete this default cube by just selecting it and clicking the delete key. And now I'm going to import an actual scan. So I go to import. This one happens to be an STL. I am going to quickly navigate to it. Okay, you can see the folder now that I've navigated to, and I'm going to bring in one of the Calcania. So this is an ankle bone, if you're not familiar, and this particular one is a fossil from Patriofelis, a mammalian carnivore. Okay, so you'll notice it doesn't seem like it appeared, but that's actually because oftentimes scans will not scan quite at the origin. So if I actually scroll out, now you can see it in view. So if I click on it and select it, you'll see that its origin is actually still at the origin. It's just the entire mesh is floating off to the side. And that's kind of a pill, because if you want to rotate it, for instance, it's going to rotate entirely around the origin. Similar thing with transformation. It just gets kind of confusing. So there's actually this really nice tool. I'm gonna do that real quick, so it's still at the origin, where you can set the origin, and you can either move the geometry, which in this case is the mesh, to the origin, or move the origin to the geometry. And you can actually select specifically to center of mass or center of volume. In this case, I'm going to move the geometry to origin, just so that I'm working right at the origin of the scene. And now you can see this is nicely snapped to the origin. So now if I want to rotate it, just like that, now it's nicely positioned so I can take a nice render of it or do other kinds of things that I want to work on.